Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret White. I am CEO and Executive Director at Mississippi Today, and we are so glad to have you all joining us for our third installment of Mississippi Writers on Mississippi Politics. This has been an outstanding series, something that we as a team have really enjoyed, and we're hearing from you, our readers, that this has been important to you as well. So we're grateful for the support as we try something new. We have always known that race and poverty and systemic issues are at the center of all of our reporting at Mississippi Today. But in this moment, we felt like it was time to open up a broader conversation among Mississippi writers and thought leaders about race in Mississippi. And it's been just a wonderful dialogue, and we thank you all for joining us in the chats, for joining us on Facebook, and for emailing us with feedback and great ideas. Many of you who are with us today are member supporters of Mississippi Today, and these programs are truly made possible by your support. Our reporters may be the ones doing the journalism, asking the questions, writing the stories, but we truly can't do it without your support. So thank you for your support of Mississippi Today. And if you haven't supported us yet, I just ask you to listen today and think about this conversation between Brittany and Aimee and what you value and what that means into your life and your experience and perspective. So without further ado, I will welcome our guest today, Aimee Nezhukumatathil, and our Emerging Reporters Fellow, Brittany Brown, for our third installment of Mississippi Writers on Mississippi Politics. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary Margaret. I'm really excited to be here with you, Aimee. I know it is a somewhat gloomy and foggy morning here in Oxford, but I'm sure seeing each other's bright faces will hopefully maybe brighten, maybe brighten the weather outside a little bit, I guess. But how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. I'm not gonna lie. It was, news. I feel like every day I'm a little nervous to open up my laptop and check the news. So it's been hard to put a smile on my face for my boys. I have two sons in particular. Put a smile on my face for my whole family, but my boys in particular. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. After the SCOTUS decision, but I'm teaching today, and that's one of the greatest privileges of my life, is to see these really just dynamic, good-hearted students making their way, finding their voice in a world that would, rather than not, find their own voice. And so that's exciting for me. So while I was a little disappointed, that's an understatement of the year. While I was a lot disappointed today, I was excited knowing again that I'd see my students in a little bit after our discussion too, and knowing that I'd be seeing you and chatting with you as well.
Well, thank you. And hearing you mention the Supreme Court decision and just opening the news and checking your news feed every day, of course, my mind is on the election, and we're exactly 1 week away.
Is it exactly 1 week today?
Exactly. Yes. So we are down to the wire. But so you mentioned you're being a professor, and so that really brings me to a question that I have for you. And those of you viewing on the webinar and from wherever you are virtually, please feel free as we're having this conversation to drop some questions into the Q&A box.
Yeah.
We can get to those and to engage with you all. But Aimee, so my question for you, so you moved to Oxford in 2016 as the Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi.
That's right.
Department, yeah. In 2016, that was right after President Donald Trump was elected. Fast forward 4 years, you're still here. We are still here. It's 2020, and we're in the midst of yet another presidential election. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts of how you have seen Mississippi change and evolve over these last 4 years that you've been here, and what do you foresee is next for the state and for Mississippians?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And, I want to preface all of this that, one, I just feel so grateful and so excited about Mississippi Today doing this whole series of really kind of taking a mirror to themselves and saying, look, have we done everything we can to have voices of color kind of give their own little mini reports and stuff like that, and actually doing action behind it. It's one thing to feel bad, but then no action taken. And I just want to commend Mississippi Today for doing that. And on top of that, I feel so to be included in this series when this state in my mind is the best state for writers, period. So to be even included in, on that, when Mississippi Today reached out to me, I felt so grateful. How could I say no to this? I also know that this is just my 4th year living here. And there are people, so that everything I say today is going to be, for those in the audience, is going to be with that knowledge in the back of my mind. I have a lot to learn, and I am excited to learn more about this state and its very complex, complicated history. So I can only speak for mine and my family's experience the last 4 years here. I'm also not Black, I'm also not white, and I'm Asian American. My father's from India and my mom's from the Philippines. But I will tell you that I love this state. And there's just been a small but vocal group who thinks that, like, oh, you shouldn't be able to speak about Mississippi because I'm a Northerner, you know, as if somehow like only the people who are born here have the right to speak. But I've also found a bigger, thankfully, group of strangers and friends alike who have been so welcoming for my voice and have made a place for me at the table, because they know and they see. I think spending 5 minutes with me, you'll see how much I love the state, how much I love Oxford, how much I love the place where I work. And I also think that you can make suggestions. And I think you could also see that there's room for improvement. I mean, shoot, I love my husband, and there's also room for improvement. So it cracks me up when I think people bristle when I offer up like some constructive criticism, like, oh, of course she would say that. She's a Northerner. What does she know? Go back to where you came from, you know? No, I'm invested in this place. When I first moved here as the Christian writer in residence, I thought this was going to be like a 9-month National Lampoon Southern Vacation. You know, I happened to be on sabbatical then, and I just thought, oh, this is going to be a nice 9 months. We'll move back. And the thing of it is, Brittany, is that I told you this already before. My family fell in love with this place. We love that we can be outside most of the year. We loved the people that we met here. Were so welcoming and so progressive and wanting to do good, wanting to make the complicated history, wanted to work with a complicated history and move forward so that the state becomes a place of acceptance. It becomes synonymous with acceptance instead of synonymous with hate and backwards thinking. And the best thing I can say about how this isn't feeling hyperbolic is that within 1 month of being here in Oxford, I turned to my husband. I can absolutely remember that moment on the couch, turned to my husband and said, this is where I want to raise our family. This is where I want to raise my family. So there's no other there's no bigger endorsement that I can make except for the fact that this is where I wanted my children, who are mixed race, by the way. My husband is white from Kansas. And this is where I wanted them to be and experience growing up. So I'm not sure if that actually completely got to your question, but how have I seen Mississippi change? So 4 years, yes, oh my goodness. So we came here in the middle of such a tumultuous election, and I will say that I have such big hope, and I know that is hard to even hear, or maybe there might be people in disbelief, but here's why. In the 4 years I've been here, the Confederate statue in the University of Mississippi's campus has been moved. I don't have to walk past it when I'm teaching anymore. State flag has been changed. State flag is off campus. at least the Confederate flag is off campus. And there's a new mascot, one that does not embody Confederate ideals. So while for some people that might be like, oh gosh, that was molasses, join the rest of the country, Mississippi, to me, that's a lot of change for 4 years. And that is, make no mistake, I've been watching with such awe and admiration that it's the students who are pushing that through, students who are being super vocal and organizing. And I'm just in awe. I bow down to them. It's so inspiring, and it's so exciting to see that those movements happen and actually make change happen in the state. So I know that there's people who've lived here all their life and has been saying this is a long time coming. I get that. But again, just if you're looking at just 4 years, so much has actually changed. And then also so much has not. You know, there's still a Confederate statue in downtown Oxford, for example. So I have hope that that things will continue to change. Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this conversation that we're having that really meets at the intersection of identity and politics, because, you know, for so many Mississippians, the two are inextricable. There's no separation.
Yes.
And so you sort of spoke to this in your previous response, but I really would like to dig into this more about Mississippi as a place, and how and when Mississippi became a home for you. So to I guess pile it on even more, like, how do you see your role in this place as a writer, as a professor, you know, all of the identities that you bring to your work as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, as a brown woman in Mississippi and in the South?
Dang, Brittany, you're asking such good questions here, which I love. I love this. It's so exhilarating. So thank you so much. These are not just I've been doing, you know this, I've been doing interviews basically since August for my new book. And so I know when someone's phoning it in, and I know when someone has done their work, and you're definitely in that latter category. Thank you. You know, I would say it's hard for me to say, like, I don't have an agenda as an Asian American woman, and I know that's not what you mean, but what I can say is what I would do wherever I live, but in particular, what I loved about Mississippi is I'm a girl of the outdoors. I love being outside. I love bird watching. I love planting gardens, and I lived for 15 plus years in Western New York, where I did not feel safe being outside. I saw more Confederate flags there than I ever do in Oxford. And actually, I was always looking over my shoulder in parking lots. I physically did not feel safe in New York. And I feel safe in Mississippi. I know there's going to be people who are like, well, you haven't been to the whole state. I get that. And again, I recognize my limitations. I can only tell you what I feel. And I will say that I love how beautiful the state is physically. It's so beautiful. I don't think that gets talked about nearly enough. And I write about the outdoors and the environment. So to me, it's constant learning about this landscape that I call home now. There's new birds, there's new bugs, there's new ways of growing plants and vegetables and fruit to eat. This past year, my whole family took on blackberries as a project, and we've never been able to grow blackberries before. It's something so small, but it brought us so much joy. And if you could just picture me and my husband and 2 half-white sons just basking, just, you know, stuffing our face with blackberries in the middle of summer, in the middle of this pandemic, we were home and we were happy. And I think that's also Mississippi as well. I think there's a lot of the ugliest parts of this state get advertised to the country and to the world, but there's so much beauty here in Mississippi. And I'm hoping through my writing, through my behavior and just my interactions with students and people I meet all over, that they see that there's beauty and there's goodness and light here in this state as well.
And thank you for bringing up your book, because I really feel like your most recent book, World of Wonders and Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments, sort of embodies like a part of what I think of when I think of Mississippi. And so you talked some about like the natural beauty that exists in this state, from the rolling foothills here in the North Mississippi Hill Country to the beautiful Gulf Coast to the Mississippi Delta, the Mississippi River. I mean, there's so much natural beauty. And what I really found intriguing about your book is it sort of meets at the intersection of like memoir, poetry, and sort of like what are the lessons that nature can teach us. And you open your book with a story about the catalpa tree. And of course we have the biggest catalpa tree in the state here on this campus at the University of Mississippi. And you write, the foot-long leaves of catalpa trees, always meant to shade from persistent sun and unblinking eyes. And when I moved south, I thought I'd need to make use of those wide leaves constantly. But for the first time in my life, I haven't had to. And so how do you think your book, like I said, it's sort of almost about like the lessons that nature teaches us. How do you think it adds to and complicates the narrative about Mississippi as a place? And when I say complicates, not necessarily negative, but sort of muddies the water, if you will, about what people think of when they hear the word Mississippi.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope, thank you so much. I hope it complicates, I think, some unlearned, and I include that I include myself in that, some unlearned, or just not uninformed people's views of Mississippi. And I include myself because all I knew of Mississippi was, frankly, a time to kill and not some pleasant moments in American history. And I'm deeply ashamed of that. And I think that's important for my kids. I think it's important for my students. I think it's important for anybody who interacts with me, knows that I am willing to say I messed up and I was short-sighted. Because I think one sadness of many of current leadership in government, from a local level to a national level, is that we don't see leaders ever saying that they messed up and that they would want to do better. So this book is in some ways me wanting to celebrate the planet, really, but I was very conscious of how I wrote about Mississippi in this book. First of all, and I was very conscious of opening the book with catalpa. This is the opening of my life, and I started here 2016 in Mississippi. That's very conscious, and not that I started, back in Chicago when I was born, that kind of thing. And I did so because what struck me about the catalpa in particular is that it's a tree that I grew up seeing kind of during all of my moves from Kansas to Iowa to Wisconsin, but it was here in Mississippi, just when I was walking past, running to class, going to the student union. For those of you who don't know, the champion catalpa of the state, the biggest catalpa, is just right outside of the student union. I had several students who never knew that, and they walked past it all the time. And I found that it was kind of a beacon calling me home. It was something familiar, and yet I looked upon it with such new eyes. Like I had never truly looked at it until I was here in Mississippi. And I thought that was a good kind of metaphor for so many things, right? You think you know a tree, you think you know a state, and then you can look upon it with fresh eyes and see how vibrant it is, how full of art and beautiful, good-hearted people. And everything that you might have known about something would just go out the window because you see with concrete evidence that it's not the case, So what I love about finishing up that essay and going through revisions on that essay was that it's part of my teaching practice. I teach nature writing and environmental literature in addition to poetry, but our campus is known nationally, internationally for its physical beauty, and so many of my students, in fact, I dare say all but one student my first year here, had never heard of something called the tree trail. Do you know this, Brittany? Did I ask you this?
No.
You can print this out. Oh my goodness, you got to do this on a nicer day when it's not raining. But you can find this on the Ole Miss webpage, homepage, and it's this beautiful map of all native trees, and they're scattered all over campus. And you can walk and learn a little bit natural history about all of these trees that you would normally just zip by on the way to and from class and stuff. And I will tell you, I have frat boys, I have business students, I have people who are like, I'm not writing past this class, this isn't for me. I've watched them with their mouth agape, looking up at an Osage orange, and then realizing, oh my gosh, Professor Nezhukumatathil, this was the tree that my grandmother had, and I never knew the name, but we had a tire swing on this. And I can see, I get choked up talking about it, but I can see them remembering trees and plants and flowers that they had seen out their whole life and never really looked at, never really noticed or paid attention to. And I think that's a good metaphor for how I want them to leave my class. Because if you get to know about a catalpa, if you really get to know about a catalpa tree, you really get to know about an Osage orange tree, if you knew the names of the birds that depend on the stars to find their way home, if you learn about another culture, really get to know about a family that's different than you, different religion, different skin color, how could you ever want to make a violence on these plants, animals, and people if you really get to know them? And I see that from people who have no intention of becoming writers. I just see that our shared humanity comes into play. It's 100% the case. I've never seen a situation where that does not happen, where they really get to know a plant or animal or about another culture. There's a tenderness that blooms. There's a tenderness that happens. I'm not saying you're going to be BFFs with somebody, but you will do everything you can to not make a violence on that person or to not hurt them. And I think, gosh, don't you see it? That's what's lacking so much today. When we have administration and state leaders who want to keep anything different they want to keep that as something to be fearful of, something to distrust. Anyone with brown skin is someone to distrust. And they don't have to say it. They don't have to say, I distrust people with brown skin. I distrust Latinos. I want to close up, all they have to do is their actions speak louder than words. When I look at their social pictures or who they hang out with, who they have dinners with, and I don't see anybody with skin my color, their actions speak louder than words. So to me, as someone who is admittedly here, just new-ish for 4 years, to me, if you don't have someone who's different than you in your circle of friends and the people who are supposed to be giving you advice, that speaks louder than any sort of statement that you could possibly be making. You could say you're not racist. You could say you have friends of all colors, but if you're not actually putting time in with those people and getting to know them, you've already said all you are about, your actions already said what you're all about, I don't know. I feel like that's a big, long answer to your question, Brittany, but it's the truth, we see that. And you know what, here's the thing. I go in and speak to elementary school students. I never have to tell them to be curious about other plants or animals. They want to know about me. They want to know about my Filipino mother. They want to know about my Indian dad. They want to know about plants and animals. Nobody has to teach them to be curious. So it's really weird and strange that we have some grown-ups who kind of forgot what it's like to be curious about other things besides making themselves money and giving themselves more power, or people who look like them more power. So
that curiosity is like really what I love about being a journalist, is that
yes.
And I'm sure, in your role as being a writer too, you just really never stop learning. You never stop exploring. You never stop.
Exactly.
And
isn't that so exhilarating when you learn something new? I'm 45 years old. I don't want to feel like I learned all there is to know about this planet. I want to always feel like a student. And you could tell within 5 minutes of talking with someone when they think they know all there is to know, that they're not willing to they know how to run a town, they know how to run a state, they know how to run a campus, whatever. If they don't seem curious about anything, genuinely curious, it's so apparent. It's so apparent. I try not to laugh because it's so apparent.
Yeah. But I mean, even in your previous response, though, I appreciate you like getting emotional and like that connectivity between nature and animals and memory and family, because what you were sort of talking about and what your students have shared, and like seeing a tree and remembering their grandparents, that's very true in my own upbringing in Mississippi. Going outside and asking my grandfather, like, what are you planting, like what are you growing? And now we have just so many plum trees and wild strawberries and muscadine. And, these are things that are just growing naturally. We don't even, I don't even know what I'm doing out there, but, or seeing, the magnolia tree on the other side of the house. And it represents, like your student said, like familiarity, Mississippi place, the smells. It's just all so interconnected, and just really, I think, speaks to the intricacies of life. And so, but also another thing I'm really interested in is like how in this conversation and in your book, you really lean into identity, like racial and ethnic identity, and what it means really maybe not to fall into one or other category, or sort of melting between two. And so I really want to point out one of the pieces in your book about your sons. I really love the title because I think it really digs into like what you were really like embodying. So the title of that specific piece is Questions While Searching for Birds with My Half-White Sons, aged 6 and 9, National Audubon Bird Count Day, Oxford, Mississippi. So you highlight some of their questions, questions that any 6 and 9-year-old would have. And the two that really stood out to me is your son's asking, why do some people not like brown people? And can I have good camouflage even though I'm half and half? So as a mother and as a Mississippian, like, how did you respond to this? As a brown woman with Filipino and South Indian roots, like, how do you see yourself in Mississippi? How do you see your children in Mississippi? Just really digging more into the conversation about race, ethnic identity, nationality, and place.
Yeah. Thank you. That was such I feel slightly guilty because I didn't really have to write it. I was just kind of dictating. My sons wrote it basically. And, it brings me when I hear you read out loud their actual questions, it just makes me want to swoon. Now they have different concerns. They're worried about Minecraft and stuff like that. But so just to put into context, that was my first year here in Mississippi, and the Holly Springs Audubon Center was doing this national bird count. So I was home with the kids, and we took it as a great time. I treasure those moments where just being outside, away from computers, away from phones or anything like that. And we were literally supposed to just mark down within an hour period how many birds we saw. But what I love about, and I don't do this just for a bird count for the Audubon Society, but spending time outside in Mississippi in particular, I just feel, I think there's something to it where I feel this with my friends, I feel this with my sons. We just have good conversations in ways that maybe we don't have on the phone or in a quick text message or something like that. So kind of these bigger, deeper questions that I hope my kids will always feel comfortable asking me, in ways that there's something about just being relaxed outside where they know that they can really ask me anything and I'll at least try my best to answer them. And I do that when we're inside too, but not as much. There's something about, oh, this is time with mommy. I can anything I've been wondering about, I can ask them. So I just, that's one of my most special things that I have with them. But that one in particular, again, ages 6 and 9, that was happening. So two things were happening then to give context. One, this didn't happen in my kids' classroom, but in another classroom that, 9-year-olds, they were talking amongst themselves, I think, at lunch. And it's kind of heartbreaking. Again, this is 2016, where some white kids in the classroom were chanting, "Build that wall." I don't know if you can remember, but 4 years ago, that was a phrase that had gone on. And I think there was some videos that happened, all over the country. And I thought, maybe this won't happen in Oxford. And so my heart sank when I heard that, oh, that happened in a 9-year-old's classroom. And there's Latino children in there. And even if there wasn't, it's such a poisonous thing to hear, So they had a lot of questions about that. And at the same time, gosh, I'm thinking that was such a trash fire year too. You know, in my mind, I think, oh, the golden year of 2016, but I have a record of it because I was literally just writing down questions for my students. But at the same time, they also had, for my sons, their first lockdown drill ever. So they were still kind of processing. I don't know exactly. To this day, I still don't know how exactly. For example, my 6-year-old was told like why they're doing this. I mean, it seemed strange and almost like a game in some ways for a 6-year-old. My 9-year-old, though, was starting to piece things together. Like, oh, these are people who hunt kids. That was his exact phrase. That wasn't my phrase. So when people who hunt kids come into our building, we have to hide. And that, as not just as a parent, but any human, that should break your heart that I'm even having these conversations with a 9 and a 6-year-old. So I think I don't know for sure, I haven't completely asked him. I think for my 9-year-old was conflating someone who hunts kids, like a school shooter, with trying to piece together, build that wall, why, you know, and stuff like that. So you get the heartbreaking question, why do some white people not like brown people? And we had just finished watching Cardinals, and so we were talking about how male cardinals have bright red camouflage, women cardinals have brown camouflage. And I mentioned this in the book, they were like, oh, I'm so happy, Mommy, you have brown. It just chokes me up. But they were saying that it's good that you're like a brown cardinal because you could be camouflaged. And so I'm sorry, but that's a 6 and a 9-year-old. We're putting those things together. And that rhetoric was never part of our lives until the monster who's in office came into office or was running. That's a 6 and a 9-year-old who, in their own kid's way, were saying they're glad their mommy is brown because I could hide if I need to. And oh gosh, sorry, I didn't expect to get so choked up, but like I said, my kids are 13 and 10 now, but they've always been so perceptive. And my husband and I, especially when they were little, we tried to not scare them. We tried to not really even have these kind of grown-up discussions, but this is them piecing things together. So to me, that's not politics. That's just, where is our humanity? If we can witness that situation, or in my case, like I write about that situation, and how do you not feel kind of just ashamed that there's anybody that is running for the leader of our country who can encourage that rhetoric where kids who are mixed, how much more kids that are Black or kids that are, you know, fully brown, how kids can wonder if something, and be fearful if something's going to happen to their brown mother. What are we doing? What are we even doing where that's okay? That should disqualify you from being in any sort of leadership position. And anybody who supports that, I just wonder, like, where is your humanity? Can you not see on a basic level, like, I know you want to be rich, but can you not see that children shouldn't be having to ask these questions of their parents? That's, I think, what's one of the most disappointing and damaging things that our kids are facing today is they're watching and they're observing how grown-ups are acting and how they say one whole group are racists, and they have friends in this group. You know what I mean? They have friends who are Muslim, they have friends who are Latino, and that all happens here in Oxford. And then they hear people who are supposed to be our leaders disparage these people's family. They're watching and they're observing. And to me, it's such a shame, because if you go in and actually work with kids, you see how much full of love and curiosity they are, and they're watching grown-ups mess it all up. So sorry, I didn't mean to go on such a tangent, but it really took me back. It's almost 4 years ago exactly when this was happening, and I can't believe we're still having these conversations still.
And Aimee, I just want to say I appreciate your vulnerability and your openness in this conversation.
I'm such a dork. Oh my goodness.
No, I'm the same. I'm a crybaby too. It's okay. You're good. But thank you. And I think it's really, again, adding to this thread that you've been weaving for us throughout this conversation. That is, just the interconnectedness, the ways in which we all sort of rely on each other, like children
Yes.
are very, like you said, perceptive and observant. And though they may be 6 and 9 or 10 and 13 or whatever the age may be, they're observing, just as you were, and observing birds and taking note of what's going on and applying, sort of the biological aspects of birds to us as humans, and in a way to sort of make sense of life. In a way, that's what we're sort of all doing, even at our big age.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's just, I've just been so grateful. I want to just emphasize too how much Mississippi has given us, my family. Like, we love the state. We are, anytime on the weekends that we can get out, as soon as the kids like close up their laptops from virtual school, we are at Sardis Lake, we are at Whirlpool Trail, somewhere where we could just be outside and have those conversations and that connection again and stuff. I don't think I would, I know I wouldn't, I didn't have that in any of the places I lived where I could be outside so much. And for that, not only for my professional life, but for my family's life, I'm so glad that we are able to be close through our enjoyment of the outdoors. And the people, the families of my kids' friends are some of the most incredible people I've ever met my whole life. The kindest, biggest hearts, the ones who are so inclusive and wanting to push Mississippi forward to make this a state that is welcoming for all people, not just one skin color. And these are white folks. These are the good white folks. And I just feel so lucky that my kids made friends with their kids. So that has also, you asked like kind of why Mississippi is home now. It's the people, it's the landscape. And I know we can be better. I want, again, I want ultimately Mississippi to be a stand-in for the word love. And I think we could do it. I know we can do it.
And just hearing you, as someone who was not born and raised in Mississippi, speak about the natural beauty that is here in the state is really refreshing and really beautiful in a way, in ways that, is making me think of how I take things for granted, the air, I take some of that for granted. So now I need to go out on that tree. This lake more, but
you got to print that out, Brittany. Oh my goodness, you got to print that out and keep it in your office. So anytime you get a chance, like to just, I'm not saying you have to do it all one day because it's a lot, but to do like part of the tree trail one day, you will feel so refreshed. It's the best. All my students, 100%, they all say, even the grumpiest ones who are like, I don't like the outdoors. They all were like, you know what? I have to admit, I learned something, and I can appreciate this tree. It's so beautiful. Now I'll never forget what this tree looks like, Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop.
I do have one more question for you before we to some Q&A from the audience. And that is just, how do you see yourself in your work? Myself personally, as a Mississippi native and as a journalist, I often see myself and I always bring my whole self to this work, And so I'm just interested in hearing what that experience is like for you.
Can you repeat the first part of the question? Like, I got the last part, but the first part was crackling a little bit.
I was saying, like, how do you see yourself in your work? And I was saying for me,
okay.
personally, like as a Mississippi native and as a journalist, I often see myself in this work, but I always bring my whole self to this work,
Yeah.
And I'm interested in hearing what that experience is like for you as a professor, as an author.
Well, that's a big kind of complex question. So, I mean, I could write an entire kind of essay on that. What I can at least narrow it down to here for this conversation is that, when I first started writing and trying to piece together metaphors and first fell in love with writing, first, and I never knew there were living writers until my junior year of undergrad. So I feel like I came late to the game. I was a hapless chemistry major. But I always loved stories. I always loved kind of making metaphors on my own. I didn't know that you could study how to do that, really. And anyway, and I was a big reader. So we didn't have, actually, we really didn't have any literature in my house growing up. We had a ton of science and medical books, but not literature. So I was always in the library, and thank goodness I had parents who, no matter how busy they were, they found time to take me and my sister to the library. And I just remember sitting on the floor of the science nature section of the grown-up section, just, again, my mouth open, flipping the pages, just being in awe of the giant squid, whale sharks, and various shells, or, various rock formations. I mean, let's be honest, I was a complete nerd. But I never saw anybody that looked like me authoring any of those books. Never, rarely ever saw a woman, but certainly nobody Asian American, certainly nobody with brown skin. And so, I didn't have the vocabulary for it as an 8-year-old, but after a while you start, and I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, so I never also saw anybody that looked like me, any TV, movies. So when you add books to that, you start thinking, should Asian Americans not be outside? Or why are the only depictions of Asian Americans I see like on computers and math whizzes? And it made me feel terrible because I was by far not a math whiz. Let's just say math is not my strong suit. And so, life goes on, but then you begin to wonder, the thing that you love so much, nature and nature writing, you don't see yourself in. So you think, okay, well, maybe that's the world saying there's no place for you here. It wasn't until much later so for the longest time, I did not write about nature. I was writing about breakups and relationships, basically anything. But when I finally leaned into that, the original thing that I loved so much, which is the outdoors and bizarro plants and animals, that's when it just felt like I could put my whole self in it. I could write myself into this whole genre where I never saw an Asian American before. And I think for me, it's not like, push out the white writers by any means, because I grew up loving Thoreau, reading Terry Tempest Williams, reading Annie Dillard, all these white nature writers. And I'm so grateful that I learned about craft from them. But I also think it's 2020 and it's time to kind of just broaden the table and let other voices have a seat at the table. Other non-white, non-straight voices have a seat at the table, and non-ability, like all different abilities. So for 5 years, I was the poetry editor at one of the greatest nature writing magazines, Orion Magazine. And part of my big goal there was to just broaden the conversation so that we get a wide variety of voices. And that's not just for brown folks, that's to enrich white folks' life as well. You know what I mean? Like, my white husband will be the first person to say that it was a travesty that the writing he read about the outdoors was dominated by white straight folks, So I think it's not, I'm just doing this for brown students or, that kind of, no, it's for white students. For many of my students, I'd say 90% of my students, I'm the first Asian American professor they've ever had. So for the Asian American students that are in my classes, their world just gets unlocked a little bit to think that, it's a possibility. This shouldn't be such a rare thing in 2020, maybe in 1955, but not in 2020, you know what I mean? And so I think where I see myself is just, hopefully, I'm not going to beat anyone over the head with it, but I'm hoping that by word and the art that I make and how I teach students of all backgrounds, that they see that there's a bigger conversation to be had, a more robust and dynamic conversation to be had when you are reading people of all backgrounds, people who are not like your family, people who are not like your religion, people who are not like your childhood experience. What a richer place we have when we get to, again, that's how we get to learn about other plants and animals and cultures outside of our own. I get that maybe your town is all white and you may not have a whole lot of people to choose from, but that's what books are for. That's what books are for. And they're free at the library. So to me, in 2020, there's no excuse to have such a limited worldview. And especially if you are planning on being any form of, serving in any form of government, that's on you to make sure you are as well-read as possible from people of all different walks of life. So my hope is just hopefully kind of just broaden the conversations of who gets to write about the environment, who gets to teach about the environment, and to show people of all backgrounds that there's a place for them too. They're all connected. Race is connected to environmental justice, it's connected to social justice. That's not a liberal idea. That's a human idea. That's a human idea. And when we try to make that into some sort of weird, like, oh, only the blue side likes that. Like, I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought people who identify as, voting red, they like to breathe clean air too. I thought, they'd like to have their kids not be swimming in muck and nuclear fluid or whatever, so to me, I'm hoping to bring back humanity and kindness and tenderness to my classroom, but also through the books and the art that I make as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And in our last 15 minutes of our conversation today, it just feels like it's flown by. We have some questions coming in from our audience. And the first question we have here is from Jarius Adams. And his question is, what does the future of Mississippi look like for you?
Gosh, that's such a good question. And I always feel a little like Pollyanna when I answer it, but it's the truth, like I feel, so one of my favorite novelists, Margaret, said recently in a talk that she has hope for the future. And I would just say, and people are like, why? How could you do that? You're the author of The Handmaid's Tale, for crying out loud. And she said something that was so poignant, and I've been thinking about it ever since. From this past summer. She said, you know what? The future has not been written yet. The future has not been written yet. And what I love about applying that to Mississippi, during a time when maybe many of us don't have much hope, like you said, a week before the election, we'll see. I'm trying my best. Is that the future is not yet written, and anything can change, anything can happen. And so to me, that's exciting. If we have to concede that, we can get leaders who only value one skin color elected, we have to also hope with 50% at least that we can elect people who would want the state to succeed for all skin colors and to be a leader for all people. So I'm just choosing, at least now, the hope, and I'm choosing that in about, I don't know, I can't give it a time frame, but I'm hoping that my kids will not have to have the same conversations that I've had to have with my partner. Whoever, if my kids have partners, if my kids have kids, I'm hoping that they're not going to have to observe at least kids when they're grown-ups being worried about brown people. Gosh, what a magical thing that would be. How amazing if we could have kids in Mississippi not worried about the safety for brown people. Gosh, it gets me teary-eyed thinking about it, but I think we have to, right? We have to. I think we lose when we start thinking that it can't happen. So that's a big answer, Jarius, but thank you so much for asking that. I don't know, most days, honestly, I feel like, putting a weighted blanket over me and just hiding out till December. But I have to believe that goodness will prevail, and that science will prevail, and that just basic human goodness will prevail. So I have to believe that all these unmoisturized, raggedy leaders who only want to advance one color of skin, I'm hoping that that's just going to be a relic, because it is just, it's just ugly. It's frankly ugly. And it's also unchristian. I'm Christian, and I love saying that now. And I used to just hate that, hate mentioning it. But I think more than ever, I feel like I have to say it because I believe in love. And I've never seen, I haven't seen a lot of leaders talk about any initiatives that focus on love and kindness and empathy for their fellow human beings. I see a lot of hate, a lot of distrust, a lot of violence. Jesus would be like, yikes, what are y'all doing? I don't get my name out your mouth, you know? So I think that also needs to be said too. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that in the state of Mississippi. I think Mississippi can be loved. I don't know when, but I hope that I see that in my lifetime.
Thank you. And we have a question from Kaylee Skinner.
Okay.
Our question is, did moving to Mississippi prompt you to have any new conversations with your husband or your children about being a mixed race or a biracial family? Multiracial families here are not uncommon, but also not the norm. Did moving to a new place like this start any conversations with your own family?
Absolutely, absolutely. And although I would say they were started in New York as well, but I think they were highlighted here, you know, just because my kids have been older and are going through middle school here in Mississippi. So that's such a nice, great question. I would say that some of these conversations, and I always want to value the privacy of my kids and my husband too, but I will say some of these questions were kind of hard for my husband to hear. And one of them in particular was that, you know, for our sons, I think the people who know us both, they could tell that they're mixed a little bit, but mostly our sons identify physically. If you just saw them on the street, they look white. And with that comes a whole bunch of conversations I didn't know I'd be having, or even really know how to have with my white husband. For example, I can say that, you know, it is, and maybe I am a little bit, I am, not maybe, I am a little bit harder on them, because a common refrain that I know my husband and my kids won't mind me saying is, you know, I say to them, I'll be danged if I'm raising a white boy who, you know, does X, Y, Z. You know what I mean? That could be doesn't know how to clean up after themselves. That could be doesn't know how to cook. That can be also does not show respect to women. That could also be does not, or who ends up teasing somebody, you know, that kind of thing. So however fair or unfair that is, I think I would be remiss as a mother to not prepare them for the fact that many people will look at them and assume that they're white and they don't get a pass on whatever. I mean, I don't want them to have a pass on anything, but that they would have a pass somehow because, oh, their mother's brown, therefore they couldn't do anything wrong, because, oh, they know better. No, I want their actions to speak louder than words. So that's what I try to do in my life. And as boys that are going to grow into white looking men, I want them to be beacons of kindness and light and curiosity and tenderness. I want them to be in a Mississippi where it's okay for them to be sad. It's okay for them to be hurt and to express that, because this toxic masculinity that I see a lot in white people, and specifically white men, ends with my kids. And I'm so glad that my white husband is on board with that. So I've already revealed too much, but we've had those hard conversations as recently as yesterday when my boys left a bunch of pots on the stove. They're just now learning to cook, but I was like, I am not sending out white boys into this world who don't know how to clean up after themselves, you know? And also, I will say too, to end on a note of positivity for them, they have been such radiant beams and lighthouses for me on how to be good people. So I am not perfect by any means, and they mess up as well, but more often than not, I'm so proud of the young men that they're coming to be. And that, more than any book, more than any award, that is my greatest gift and privilege to help shape these men who also love Mississippi, these young men who love Mississippi too.
Now, a few more questions before we wrap up. So we have a question from Quay Reed. Her question is, thank you both for this great work. And aside from writing and teaching, what other things are you doing or might be doing to bring about change at the University of Mississippi?
Well, I'm tenured here at the university, and I'm trying to do my best to be visible when there are discussions on race and to let people know that it's not a black-white issue. I hear that a lot from white folks. It's not just black-white. There's all kinds of people who live here who kind of fit in between them. And it means using my voice. I don't know how to say this yet exactly without sounding like because I'm not nobody's savior by any means, and I don't want to be that either, but using my voice. I've been teaching in higher ed for over 20 years, using my voice to kind of be some sort of bridge or connector to administration, to local officials, to say, hey, heads up, you may not have considered this, but let's have a conversation, that kind of thing, to reach out. I think a lot of times, I kind of don't like this, but some friends joke like, oh, you're my safe brown friend. Like I know how to talk to kind of white folks. I know how to talk to Black folks, and I know how to talk to I know how to talk to folks in ways that hopefully doesn't make them feel attacked. And one of the hardest things I ever had to do in Mississippi was to tell a former chancellor that, when this chancellor was asking, kind of in so many words, what's the big deal? My hands are tied. We can't do anything about this Confederate statue in the welcoming gates of our university. And I think for many of my colleagues, it seemed to be like such a, how can you not want the statue removed? It seemed like such a given, but I think one of the hardest conversations I had to have is in a room full of people who I hadn't really fully known yet at that point, was to tell them straight up, with all due respect, we are elevating, if we're looking back to ancient Greeks and ancient Romans who made statues of things they wanted to honor and to remember and to praise, they didn't praise like the bad stuff that happened in their history. They praised the things that they wanted to emulate and things that they wanted to hold up as ideals. So with that in mind, we can talk about Greek and Romans, but that happened in ancient India. These were people that were heroes or gods. And here you're trying to tell me with a straight face that we want to elevate a Confederate statue as a hero or a god, when that statue the person who is represented by that statue would have killed me or worse if I was walking across campus by myself. And I have to walk across campus to teach white students how to be more articulate and how to make metaphors and how to write better while I see this monster elevated. You trying to tell me that that's acceptable? And I think the room was dead quiet, because here I'm telling this to the chancellor, and the chancellor had no words. And it just felt, that was a moment for me who was made to kind of be quiet. I'm used to, I was used to be seen but not heard, a straight A's, honor student, teacher's pet, always make myself small, do my work, keep my head down. That's it. And I realized that's also part of the problem, that if you do that, nothing changes. And if the students, incredible students of Mississippi, if they did that, we'd still have a ashy Confederate mascot. We would have the statue still in place, so they have been the most inspiring people to me. And I know that they have taken the mantle from, the elders in this great state's history, of making change, making social change. So I'm limited to some extent because I travel a lot, but when I'm home, I try to make it count and try to make it so that I'm not swept under the rug. My silence is not complicity. I think I have to do that. My white colleagues have to do that. And I've been so inspired by what I've seen here in Mississippi.
And we're down to 2 questions in 2 minutes. I want to make sure I get
okay,
to.
Yes.
We have a question here from Will Carpenter. His question is, you speak on the need for diversity and love for each other with the same passion you talk about nature. Do you see a sort of interconnection between love of nature with a love for each other?
Oh, absolutely. We're so connected. We're so connected, right? And I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's been recent developments in the biology world where we find out that trees literally communicate with each other. I don't know if you read, I'm blanking on the book title, but this rocked the scientific world recently. Like, trees can actually say, like, oh, there's poison over here. I'm really like making this simplified, but I'm going to send down signals to the roots so they could tell other trees over here to bend away from the poison, things like that. When you think of that trees are connected to each other, that animals depend on each other, and we also depend on each other too. So I'm depending on my right-leaning friends to stand up for love and to stand up for kindness. I'm depending on them because I can't do this. People who lean left can't do this all on their own. We need to be able to have people who say, enough is enough. I'm tired of spreading hate. I'm tired of fear-mongering over immigrants who are doing all the terrible work that Mississippians don't want to do. You know what I mean? And so I think that too, I'm not saying that all the problems of race will be solved in Mississippi if you just go outside and just learning things, but it's a start. It's a heck of a start. And the proof I have of that is I've got mixed classes, people of all social backgrounds, all economic backgrounds, all different religions, all different, I've got red leading students, blue reading students, and they all come out kinder. By the time May comes around and by the time the end of the semester comes around, they all come out kinder. And that's not because I've been telling them every day, hey, let's be kind to each other. Let's actually pay attention to people suffering. It's because they've at least made starts to care about something else besides their own personal gain. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for that question. And we have one more?
Yes, a final comment and question from Cheryl Taylor Thornhill. She just wanted to start off first by just saying thank you for your emotional honesty and that you're an asset to the state of Mississippi, and that she
thank you.
She said that you make us a stronger state. But to get to her question, she said that she grew up in the Piney Woods in Hattiesburg and lived 10 years in the Delta. She said that she's now retired to the Gulf Coast. And have you been able to visit the Gulf Coast, and have you written about the environment on the coast?
I'm so glad that you asked that. That's such a great question to end on. I have not, and I am dying over it. Here's the thing. I won from the Mississippi Arts Council. I won a grant from them to write about Mississippi landscape. And this happened all just before the pandemic, and so I had all these trips planned to kind of like rent a place out on the coast, and I wanted to investigate shorebirds because my students, they're the ones who taught me, the students that are from the Delta, they would say, okay, this is good, but you need to get down to the Delta and check out the birds there. You need to check out the foliage there. They were I may not have considered it had my students not kept telling me about it. So that's what I mean. Once you start falling in love with the outdoors, it becomes contagious. And these were students who on the first day of classes were like, oh, I'm not really into the outdoors. I don't like nature. But as they could see my enthusiasm for all parts of the planet, they were starting to realize, oh, you need to and they were even saying why don't we do a field trip down to the Delta and stay there for a week. And so that is on, if and when this pandemic is over, that is literally my next step of research in my writing, is to go down to the Delta and investigate all these plants and animals. I'm dying to see roseate spoonbills. And I know there's great groups here in North Mississippi, but I want to get down to the Delta for some nature watching.
Well, thank you. And folks on Facebook, they want to know where they can buy your book.
Oh, so lovely, so lovely. Well, I would be remiss if I did not plug the best bookstore in all the land. That is Square Books, right here in Oxford, Mississippi. They were the ones, my first day in Oxford, they knew who I was. They were kind of anticipating me. They didn't know I'd show up that day. But they are the only place I've made a deal with them, that it's the only place where you can get signed copies, and they will ship it out to you wherever you are. But Lemuria Books also has it as well. So I would just ask to avoid the big A. They don't care for the little folks, and there's so many independent bookstores in Mississippi. So that money goes back to local businesses, and gosh, they need it so bad right now. So thank you so much for asking.
Thank you. All right, and I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today. I'm not sure if Mary Margaret is going to hop back on to close us out, but if not, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, Aimee. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your openness and the conversation. It's really been a pleasure to share this space with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. These are such great questions that help me just kind of like crack open some things that I think need to be in an essay. So this has been so helpful. You, it was the perfect person to have this conversation with. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you all so much for taking time in the middle of your lunch hour. I appreciate it. I'm going to have a little bit of time now to get ready for my my two classes here in Mississippi, and I know my students will be excited to chat with me. And that is honestly one of my favorite things about working from home, is that they all show up, you know, sick or not sick, they're showing up to the class, and it helps me realize how much we need connection with each other. So thank you all so much. I so appreciate it. And Mississippi Today, thank you for your hard-hitting journalism that pulls no punches. Thank you so much.